Countless people around the world continue to suffer the effects of racism.
The American dream is supposed to be for everyone, right? But what if certain states aren't living up to that promise? From the slave trade to the Jim Crow era, the United States' history of government-sanctioned racism covers centuries of generations. Even though such laws have been long since abolished, their effects are still felt and have influenced many aspects of racial inequality in the United States to this day. Are these states truly facing serious allegations of the harsh realities that persist in the 21st century? Here are 10 states where black people are not welcomed. Starting with number 10, New York. Racial inequality is one of the main causes of the greatest level of income inequality in the U.S., which is seen in New York State. In the state, the average income for white homes is $76,737 annually, while the average black household makes only $48,557. Approximately 1 in 5 black citizens, as opposed to 1 in 10 white people, are below the poverty line. In the United States, one of the most practical ways to create wealth for future generations is to become a homeowner. In New York, the homeownership rate for black people is 31.3%, which is less than half of the 63.6% rate for white people. Number 9, Mississippi. Following closely is Mississippi's history of racial violence and past segregation, which has made it one of the most segregated states in the nation and continues to affect its black citizens to this day. Although the difficulties are not always obvious, the blacks are constantly there. Living in some areas of Mississippi may expose one to quiet signals that one is not welcome and minor assaults from neighbors. Black employees have similar experiences because despite their best efforts, advancements frequently appear unattainable, and many believe their contributions are not acknowledged. Additionally, when traveling in Mississippi, going off the usual route may result in encounters with glaring stares or worse, outright hostility. Approximately 57% of black Mississippians today live in majority black areas, according to the census. Black citizens currently have a poverty rate of 31.6%, which is significantly higher than the white population's 12.8% poverty rate. In Mississippi, black workers have a more than twofold higher unemployment rate than white workers, however. Could this be a coincidence? Number 8, Connecticut. Due to its high rate of house ownership and wide wealth disparity, this East Coast state was listed as one of the worst. Some of the wealthiest people in the country refer to Connecticut as home, making it a state noted for its prosperity, yet white people make up the majority of its citizens. Despite having one of the lowest rates of poverty for white residents at 6%, a 24/7 Wall Street survey found that more than 20% of black people live in poverty. One factor contributing to some of the worst income disparity in the U.S. is racial inequality in Connecticut. The average black home in the state makes only $49,000 annually, which is almost $36,500 less than the median income of $85,502 for white households. Due to differences in the labor market, black people in Connecticut are more than twice as likely as white workers to be jobless, which contributes to income disparity. Social as well as economic disparities exist, especially when it comes to the legal and law enforcement systems. The likelihood of being jailed in a government-owned correctional facility is over 11 times higher for black Connecticut citizens than for white residents. This contributes to Connecticut's ranking as the Northeast's worst state for black Americans. Number 7, Missouri. Another silent but obvious state where black people seem not to be welcomed is Missouri. Black people in Missouri also encounter obstacles in their pursuit of education, employment, and travel. The isolation can be unbearable for pupils, especially those who attend school in rural places. In Missouri, discrimination against workers is also a problem, particularly in smaller communities. Travelers have similar situations where they may be hired for a position but later discover that their growth is impeded and they are not offered the same possibilities as their white coworkers. In the Midwest, Missouri has the least amount of racial inequality. Nevertheless, it is one of the top states in the country for inequality. Approximately 1 in 9 white Missourians and nearly 1 in 4 black Missourians fall below the poverty level. Additionally, the unemployment rate for black state employees is more than twice that of white employees. Segregation is partially to blame for racial inequities in Missouri, as it is in most of the United States. Missouri is one of the most segregated states in the nation as a result of racism and other discriminatory tactics, especially in large cities. Black communities are home to more than half of the state's black population. In addition to having underfunded and overcrowded schools, many of these neighborhoods were underserved and still had little economic possibilities. I think it is quite disheartening, but the next state is heartbreaking. Number 6, Texas. Particularly in the area of education, not all of Texas is hospitable to black people. Much of the racial inequality that exists in Texas now is a result of segregation that occurred in the state in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Black schools in the state have historically received less money, and black children who have gone to schools in rural Texas have reported feeling singled out, especially at schools with little racial diversity. Black employees in the state experience comparable challenges, especially those who moved to smaller areas. They were usually assigned to low-skilled labor positions, and many labor organizations denied them membership. Additionally, they frequently received lower pay when they held the same position as white workers. Texas can feel like a patchwork to visitors, and they may find employment in industries like healthcare or education, but their career paths frequently stop because of subtle biases that keep them from moving further. It is possible to have an amazing time in the metropolis and then feel uneasy when you stop in a smaller town. The state's current black home ownership percentage of 40.7% is much lower than the white home ownership rate of 66.4%. Black Texas residents' incomes continue to lag much behind those of whites. While the majority of white households in the state make over $64,810 annually, the majority of black households make less than $47,000. Number 5, Iowa. Another Midwestern state where black people are not welcomed is Iowa. The homeownership difference between white and black residents is the second largest at 50%, and it surprisingly has the lowest education gap of any state at 11%. Black people in Iowa have a level of imprisonment that is more than 9 times higher than that of white people. Despite making up only 3.6% of the state's population, more than 25% of Iowans imprisoned in state or federal prisons are black. This discrepancy fuels inequality in other domains, such as political and economic results. For instance, a murder record restricts 11.4% of black Iowans, while it restricts 1.5% of white Iowans. Criminal histories and imprisonment can also significantly lower earning potential and job chances. In Iowa, the white unemployment rate is 3.3%, while the black unemployment rate is 10.6%. Furthermore, the average black household in the state makes only $32,139 annually, which is much less than the average income of $62,097 for white households in the same state. Let's take it a step further, moving on to the next state. Number 4, Florida. Black children who attend more conservative or rural schools frequently experience a lack of understanding and representation. Outside of major cities, black workers frequently report a barrier to employment with fewer opportunities for advancement and more instances of visible and invisible discrimination. For travelers, whether they are students seeking education, workers seeking career opportunities, or tourists exploring new places, some parts of Florida can feel like a step back in time. Even though Florida's overall racial disparities are not as severe as those in most other states, especially those in the South, there are still significant racial differences in important socioeconomic factors. Florida's 9.1% black unemployment rate is almost twice as high as the state's 4.8% white unemployment rate. Furthermore, the average Florida black home makes only $41,702 annually, compared to almost $58,800 for the majority of white households. Florida's discrimination can be further seen by rates of imprisonment. At 1,207 prisoners per 100,000, Florida's black imprisonment rate is more than 4 times greater than the state's white imprisonment rate of 281 prisoners per 100,000. Number 3, Alabama. One of the most segregated states in the nation is Alabama, and it is currently home to more than half of its black citizens who reside in predominantly black neighborhoods. Although Alabama was the central point of much of the 20th century civil rights movement, it now ranks in the middle of all states in terms of important racism measures, with a large portion of that inequality being caused by the state's continued segregation, which is a remnant from the 100th century's racist laws. Black students have told stories of feeling isolated or out of place in mostly white universities, even if larger cities may have a greater variety of campuses. Alabama's black workers, particularly in smaller towns, face comparable difficulties since local industries frequently want employees to stay in their lane, and black professionals have been rejected for advancements or singled out for slight misconduct. Passengers have also complained of unpleasant experiences in small towns where the welcoming southern friendliness might suddenly become cold. There is a persistent tension that adds implicit judgments to every encounter. Although unemployment and poverty affect many Alabamans, black neighborhoods bear an unequal share of the hardship. In the state, the black poverty rate is 27.0%, which is more than twice as high as the white poverty rate of 12.3%. Additionally, black workers have a greater than 2-fold higher unemployment rate than white workers. Number 2, Minnesota. It is the second worst state in the nation for black Americans due to racism and several important socioeconomic factors. High levels of segregation in public schools and wildly different educational achievements are the results of housing segregation. The largest inequality in homeownership between white and black homeowners exists in Minnesota. In contrast to 77% of white Minnesota households, only 24% of black households in the state own their own home. In Minnesota, the racial income gap is 36%, the education gap is 15.5%, and the black house ownership percentage is the lowest of any metro region in the nation. However, at 1,219 per 100,000, the rate of imprisonment for black people is the lowest among all the states on this list. Being among the worst states in the Midwest for African Americans is not unique to Minnesota. A historian from the University of Iowa found that Midwestern states and cities are among the worst for black people to reside in. Additionally, in Minnesota, nearly 95% of white individuals have a high school degree, whereas only 81% of black persons have. Many jobs require a high school degree, and the unemployment rate for black people in Minnesota is 8.8%, which is almost 3 times higher than the rate for white people. which is 3.0%. Inequalities are social as well as economic, especially when it comes to the legal system and law enforcement. Inmates in Minnesota's government-owned correctional facilities are more than 10 times more likely to be black than white. Only 6.3% of the state's population is black, however, more than 36% of its inmates are black. Now, the number one spot on our list is Wisconsin. It should come as no surprise that Wisconsin cities frequently rank among the worst for African Americans, and the state's high imprisonment rate of 2,542 African Americans per 100,000 is a major factor in Wisconsin's ranking as the top state. In the state, black imprisonment is more than 10 times higher than white imprisonment. In terms of the poverty rate difference, average income inequality, and labor employment gap, Wisconsin came in last. While only 13% of Wisconsin's black population has earned a college degree, over 30% of the state's white population holds at least a bachelor's degree. For black Americans, Wisconsin is the worst state in the nation. With more than half of the black population living in mostly black neighborhoods, Wisconsin is a highly segregated state, partly because of housing discrimination in cities like Madison and Milwaukee. Many black neighborhoods in Wisconsin are suffering as a result of segregation, which frequently worsens racial inequality. The state's black unemployment rate is 10%, which is more than 3 times higher than the white unemployment rate of 3.0%. Furthermore, the average black household in the state makes only $31,351 annually, which is less than half of the state's white household's average income of $64,377. Inequalities are social as well as economic, especially when it comes to the legal system and law enforcement. In Wisconsin, the likelihood of imprisonment in a government-owned correctional facility is more than 12 times higher for black people than for white residents. Only 6.3% of the state's population is black, however, more than 42% of its inmates are black. Conclusion: do you think there are more states where black people are not welcomed? Kindly drop your lists in the comment section.